Hey everybody, thanks for being here. I'm Colin Stokes. I love that I can come to Humanist-hub and talk about movies. That may seem like a weird or trivial topic for community reflection, but it makes perfect sense to me. I've always loved movies, of course, but it got to a point where I was sort of considered them like a lot of people consider scripture. One of the most wonderful things about humanism to me is that we get to choose our scripture, right? We can draw on religious stories when they're useful to us, and we could draw on Greek myths if we like. We could even spend serious time on the mythology that's being created in our lifetimes. They don't all have to be old white men with beards, but that is a great appeal. So I'm not the first to point out that movies are a kind of mythology, right? I mean, Star Wars, which is the movie on the right there, for those of you who are younger than me, came out in 1977, and that kind of represented a big shift. The world of good guys and bad guys and heroes and villains have been, sort of a geek world of comic books, and this movie was such a huge hit, it sort of moved into the mainstream and made it an inherent part of our lives. We've all grown up, and we're all raising our children in a world in which there are mythologies everywhere. Maybe you're a Batman, Superman fan. Maybe your pantheon is Ariel and Simba. And no doubt there are a bunch of you who know Harry Potter's genealogy better than King David's. And humanists get to celebrate that. We do not have guilty pleasures. We don't see any negative judgment in calling stories myths, because we don't need the stories to be divinely inspired or beyond criticism. But there's another side to that, which is that's a responsibility. If we find things in stories that do not align with our values, then it's not a question of reinterpreting the story so that it makes sense, the way that a fundamentalist or a literalist has to do. It's actually our responsibility to critique our own sacred texts, to break up with them if necessary, to seek out new ones that meet our needs. And here's something special: we can push the creators of the stories, who are still alive among us, who are other human beings, to make new mythologies that can keep up with the evolving societal dynamics. But let's not kid ourselves. That is a difficult thing to do. Letting go of beloved stories is very, very painful. And I learned that from another great modern myth, which is the movie The Matrix. Raise your hand if you saw The Matrix at any point. Good, all right. Great modern myth. And I think about this moment, the taking of the red or blue pill, as being one of the most resonant concepts in our movies. Because, thinking about movies critically, thinking about culture critically, analyzing history, feels very much like the way Neo feels. You discover something about the world that had been hidden from you, and that's hidden from a lot of other people. And you're like, why does nobody know this? How can anybody function in such an ignorant way? But at the same time, do you remember who the bad guy is in the first Matrix movie? It's a guy who wants everyone to go back to sleep. It's the guy who says, no, we would rather live in the illusion. And that's such a strong part of us. We actively resist looking closely at stories if we've drawn a lot of meaning from them. So, get ready, because I'm going to attack one of the beloved formulas of today's mythologies, which is the hero journey. I believe that the hero journey has run its course for society. It's no longer helping us to solve the problems that face us. And so I'm going to go into why, and then I'm going to talk about changes that we would need to make to create our own canon and curate for our children a new set of myths that will serve them better. But before I start, a disclaimer, which is that I'm obviously speaking from my own experience. And that is representative of upper-class white children with really educated families. Your experience was different than mine. Maybe you didn't watch the same movies I did. Maybe you have no idea who those old white men with beards are. Or maybe you didn't watch movies at all, or you certainly experienced them differently as a woman or a person of color or a queer person. And I love to hear about those things, and maybe we can talk a little bit about them in the Q&A and tomorrow in the discussion group. But I believe that even if these stories only reached white boys like me, they would still be setting an agenda that ultimately runs contrary to the values that we humanists know lead to a better world. So let's deconstruct this thing. When I was growing up in the 80s, the hero journey was everywhere. So what I mean by the hero journey is what? The chosen one, okay? The one with the destiny, the special powers, an extraordinary person who, against incredible odds, shepherds the world from injustice to justice, from oppression to utopia. And there's setbacks in the middle, but the prophecy is always very clear. The movie is going to end with the world fixed and the bad guys defeated. I heard that so often that it felt like a very natural sequence in the universe. And George Lucas and Joseph Campbell told me that it was a universal formula that shaped the way all humans have understood the world since society evolved. Now, as you'll see in a minute, the story was also very finely tuned to make me particularly feel great about myself. But I still sort of gradually grew out of it. It let me down at some really key moments. It may start to let you down as you go into college. Like, what happens after you win and say you get a girl? The formula doesn't say anything about relationships, washing dishes, meeting parents, nothing like that. It doesn't say anything about working with other people in like non-linear ways, like the workplace. Pretty unhelpful. Imagine the boss saying, "Which one of you is the chosen one?" "Oh, okay, cool. We're gonna go get lunch. You want anything?" Now, the biggest break for me with real personal identification with the hero journey was parenthood. I mean, nothing makes you feel less like the center of the universe than caring for an infant, because it's obvious that they are the center of the universe. So, there they are. So I was already growing out of that mythology in my 30s, but there was a moment a few summers ago when I started to understand our national mythology is breaking too. I was visiting this place, the Constitution Center in Philadelphia. Has anybody been there? All right, cool. I thought it was dazzling. Multimedia, beautiful design, lots of evidence to support a certain story, that America was heroic. Started as a unique experiment about freedom, and because of the genius of its prophetic founding documents, the experiment got better and better, and inevitably, we end up with a life-size cutout of Obama at the end. We fixed it. To me, it was like an incredibly satisfying movie. The unlikely hero had overcome the odds and saved the world from injustice. I would have gone on to a delicious lunch and had very happy dreams that night. But I was with a dozen participants in a workshop on racism, and I was the only straight white guy. And the faces of everyone else as we sat down for lunch were glum. People said they were deeply disturbed and upset and angry. And I had the good sense, since I joined this racism course, to not talk. And so I just tried to listen and hear what their experience had been. And I'll do a poor job summarizing, but essentially, their experience made that story seem like a hokey kids movie. They had information, both from their learning, their actual history scholarship, and their life experience that the museum had left out. They knew, for instance, that the struggle for justice wasn't driven by the pure words of the Constitution, but in fact had been waged against the order that the Constitution created, whatever the words were. And that it was not a near some inevitable triumph, but actually the struggle continues with long odds and mounting casualties. From their eyes, the narrative that this institution presented was upside down. It would have been like going to a museum of the empire, congratulating itself for the accomplishments of the Rebel Alliance. Now, I mean, you can debate the different merits of these two ways of looking at the story, but because I joined this workshop was the only reason that I could even see another way of looking at the story. And I started to understand something about the hero's journey. It was so ubiquitous that not only was it immature, but it was blinding me to part of the reality of my own country. We don't just use myths to guide our own lives. We use them to make sense of the natural order of society. So looking around at what's happening in America today, I think our myths are no longer serving us. We need to find new structures for our stories in the movies and beyond, ones that we can share so that we can live in the same history. And the hero's journey, as we currently tell it in the movies, isn't actually universal at all. It's very specific. I'll put the nail on the head. Heroism, as we've grown up with it, is male, it's white, and it's violent. So let's take the blue pill and look more deeply. Okay, quick. Original Star Wars. How many female characters speak? One. Ah, close. Two. She has like 3 lines, but they're very nice. So now, our new Star Wars movies are obviously different, and that's an indicator of a recent trend, that in recent years we've had a rising awareness of gender disparities in many fields, including Hollywood. So here's another question. If you saw, in 2016, we'll go back to last year, if you saw the 100 most successful movies that came out last year, you did see some great female protagonists. What do you think the number is out of 100? 32. Almost a third of the movies. So that's good. And here's some of them, right? If you don't remember. So these are some of the movies that had female protagonists last year, and some of the ones that have come out already this year that are sort of pretty memorable and are making some pretty memorable faces. But that's not the whole story, of course. There are some scholars, this is Stacy Smith in California and Gina Davis, whose work you should follow. They basically are data geeks, and they're counting all of these characters in movies to analyze them and tell us what their real story is. So it doesn't matter whether you have a female hero or not. How many just like characters do you think we heard out of all the characters represented in the movies last year? That's a third as well. So basically you heard 2 guys talk for every 1 female that you heard talk. And out of those female characters that spoke, a full quarter of them were doing so while wearing sexually revealing clothing. So there's one more group called The Pudding. They just came out with a great analysis like this week. They went through thousands of screenplays. They used a computer. They looked at the stage directions of the screenplays to find out what verbs appear after the words he versus appearing after the words she. This is amazing. So the words that are most unique to women that as opposed to men: snuggles, giggles, squeals, sobs, weeps, blushes. Okay, that's what women do comparatively more than men. Men, meanwhile, or at least he characters, their number one thing that they do is straps. They also gallop a lot more than women. They shoot, they howl, they kill. So this is an unbalanced world. Let's put it that way. The data shows us. And it's presented to us for our whole lives. So not just when we're adults and we have critical thinking skills. Kids' movies are also Guyland. So you know Pixar, right? The gold standard of family entertainment. Over the 2000s, they just were cranking out classic after classic, these meticulously realized masterpieces, and almost every single one of them was a land of dudes. Dude toys, dude bugs, dude monsters, dude fish, dude cars, dude chefs. They did seem to have noticed, they got a memo, so recently they've started to add some great female leads. Now, when the stories are so wildly skewed towards boys and men, and so far out of their way, they go so far out of their way to erase or marginalize the female half of the world, we're getting a lie told to us. And it's not just girls and women that feel this alienation, it's also the boys and men. We're getting zero information about how to interact, support, team up with, rely on, partner with the half of the population. And we also get to see what is called heroic, which is defeating the villain and collecting a reward, which is a woman who doesn't speak very much, and when she does, she's probably wearing underwear. So we got college sexual assaults, online harassment, punishment of women for their sexual and reproductive choices. These are behaviors of men. Lots of them. So we've got a pretty good movement now to have women in the heroic role. We've got girl power. But it's hard to see how giving our girls wands and bows and arrows is going to help if one screen over in the multiplex we're teaching the boys that girls aren't people. Okay, now women, of course, are not a minority, and we do have, I guess, technically minority groups in the US. Just out of curiosity, can you guess what the percent of the movie-going audience is that is people of color? Just about 49%. So this is the movie-going audience. When those 49% go to the theater, last year they choose from a lineup of movies, and how many of the speaking characters do you think are people of color? 29. It's better than people think. Okay, then you go to the top 100 movies of all time. How many do you think star heroes who were not white? 8. And that's really just Eddie Murphy, Will Smith, Vin Diesel, and congratulations to Neil Sethi, who's the young man who starred in the Jungle Book. He's from India. This is a serious problem, of course, for kids of color. But I also think it's a problem that if you're a white male, you are shown a lot of images throughout your life that you're the good guy. And this is weird. Even in movies where the plot is explicitly about how many lousy things white people have done in history, white people somehow get in the middle there and go on a journey of redemption. And that's not just white men. So there's this kind of pat on the head to white guys. And it can happen even when the rest of the movie is pretty inclusive. So did you see Hidden Figures? Right? Came out this year. There's a moment when Kevin Costner gets to smash segregation with his powerful arm, and the black women are all looking on, admiring. That did not actually happen. But the director felt that this scene needed to be there, and an interviewer said, why did you add the scene? I mean, couldn't you have just done it the way it actually took place? And the director said, well, it needed to be there so that white audience members would have something to relate to. So just think about that for a second. What does that imply about what we have trained white audiences to believe? I've been taught that I can feel important. And when the Constitution Center used a hero journey as the template for my country, I was like, this is easy. Because I could see myself in the Founding Fathers and all those chief justices and presidents, all these heroic white men who were rescuing all the immigrants and freeing the slaves. Like, my identification with the story made the Constitution Center feel like a love letter. Okay, but it's not just all happy, because when you got your basic hero's journey movie centered on the white male, how do you know it's about to end? When the hero has a face-off with the villain, or a wand off, or just flashing lights being sort of moving between two people, buildings blowing up. It's very important as well. And remember when, in The Matrix, remember what Keanu Reeves says when he realizes he can adjust all space and time and is omnipotent and can manipulate the universe and save humanity? Guns. Lots of guns. This is like a screenwriting manual. This is nothing new. It's not a new critique, but look, none of us is going to solve our life narratives with a confrontation with a wand or a gun, and not even metaphorically. But our myths have given us very few tools to envision what this would look like. How would a conflict be resolved if we chose, say, not to destroy each other? This is a boring critique, I know. Violent confrontation has always been a part of drama, and we look to stories to imagine the ultimate conflicts with each other, and it's better than human sacrifice and gladiator matches and bear baiting. But what this means is that we white men have been brainwashed since we were little, that we're destined to save the world violently if necessary. So is it any wonder that we're seeing many of them react badly to information like, white people aren't going to be the majority in the United States for much longer, or your president is black, or your president is going to be female, or you built statues of evil people and you should replace them. All right, well, I don't think that changing the movies is going to fix all these dynamics, but I believe it will help. Because even in the last few years, I've grown because of movies. And I think there are two things that we have to change about the stories we tell to make this impact wider than just me. And the first, which is well underway, is we have to change who gets to go on the hero journey in the first place. So it's actually still controversial to have female-led movies, but they keep succeeding and making a ton of money. Lots of different genres are getting out of the stereotypes. Wonder Woman over there, among the most popular superhero films of all time. So we're starting to open up some of these stubborn rules of Hollywood. And films that center on people of color are also changing the formula. Just this year, we had these three movies that are highlighted here. We had Get Out. Anybody see Get Out? We had Hidden Figures. You already raised your hand. These were unexpected smashes. They were just runaway hits. And then over there is, you know what the movie is there on the end? Moonlight. Surprise Oscar winner for Best Picture. And it may be the first Best Picture that featured not a single white character. Seeing these movies over the last few years, along with many of the others, was somewhat like the experience I had after the Constitution Museum, right? It sort of, not seeing myself represented heroically, sort of jolted me off of the mythic plane into real life, where we're supporting actors in all the stories going on around us. And we are sometimes the bad guy. Skilled myth makers can make us root for talking raccoon and a baby tree in outer space. At least if they're violent male characters. Surely they can teach America to see itself as female, as black, as Asian, as gay, as disabled. And maybe a great movie can help us do that, even if a presidential election can't. Okay, but still, even if we cast violent stories about self-involved heroes with Taraji Henson, we are still making violent stories about self-involved heroes. And as the characters diversify, the stories have to diversify too. Now, there have been a lot of good examples that I would talk about for 2 hours. Movies where the quest is something bigger than a military victory. And I do need to especially applaud everybody's favorite mega corporation, Disney. Because somebody over at Disney Animation seems to be pretty methodically deploying their army of superb storytellers and limitless resources to achieve something like this very goal. This streak from Frozen to Zootopia to Moana, these are about quests that in which the characters refuse violence and resolve their conflict through love and forgiveness instead of conquest. And this did not keep them from being among the funniest, cleverest, most moving stories I've ever seen. Good job, Disney. But one of the most radical reframings of the Quest movie did not just come out this year. Didn't even come out in my lifetime. Did not come out in, I think, any of your lifetimes. It's nearly 80 years old, and you've probably seen it, and at least you know a lot about it, because it's as much a part of American scripture as a film can possibly be. The Wizard of Oz, this movie, breaks the formulas that we take for granted in so many ways, but I'm going to close with one scene that I think still challenges us to rethink heroism. Now, obviously you know who the main villain of The Wizard of Oz is. It's the Wicked Witch of the West, right? And she is defeated. But there's another power structure in Oz that reminds me a lot of, let's say, white America. Now, all the folks in this movie don't actually know anything about this green head, except that it's, quote, great and, quote, powerful. Okay, so Dorothy and the gang go in and they go in and they meet this so-called wizard, and they do what he says. Remember what the wizard asks them to do? Right, kill the witch, do violence. Okay? They commit that violence for him, and they return to get what he promised them. Do you remember what he does then? Puffs a lot of smoke, number one, and he says, "Come back tomorrow." He's an incrementalist. He says, well, let's stall a little bit. Now this is the ideal. Okay, so then you remember what happens after he says, "Come back tomorrow." This is maybe the most famous moment in the movie. Besides like clicking
They've
ears.
already got the things they wanted.
Right. Very next thing is, thank you, Theo. Toto notices a fishy little curtain and pulls it back, and we find out that this green head is just this guy. This is the ideal scripture for this moment, this very conversation, because we are using good critical thinking to pull back the curtain and show us what's really going on behind so much of what we take to be true. In this case, it reveals a sweating, nervous dude who's just trying to keep from being embarrassed, which is a guy that I relate to. It's how I felt as an undergrad at Harvard. It's how I felt as a new parent. I'll just keep puffing smoke and yelling, and people will pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. And as we watch a lot of big green heads spewing fire and trying to intimidate regular people, we've got to try to picture the man behind the curtain, terrified of being exposed for the faker that he is, and embarrassed about and ashamed of all the harm he's caused. Deep down, he's just another person on a journey like us. He says, "I'm a very good man, I'm just a very bad wizard." And he's also a symbol of history and culture. Phony wizards thrive everywhere because enough people believe in the big green hologram. Our nation, like Oz, is ruled by lies that we've all decided to believe in. The lie that violence solves problems. The lie that men are more important than women. The lie that white people are the chosen ones. For a few hundred years, there have been brave heroes who've been pulling back the curtain to try to show the world the truth, and they call us out with their courage and their heart and their brains, and they say, this authority is a myth. So one new hero journey we need is to follow this template. Let's make monuments honoring this type of hero. Okay, the ones who fought against false wizards, even when the wizards look like me and look like us. Let's make new myths inspired by, I don't know, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Cesar Chavez. There's no reason I can't be rooting enthusiastically for these American heroes, even without a white audience surrogate. Okay, but then there's another thing, which is that in the real world, wizards tend to fight back. We deny and attack and hold on tight to our power, especially when women are the ones pointing out what they're seeing. Even really progressive people get super, super mad when someone tells them that their behavior could have racist impact. We all can turn into that guy in the Matrix, willing to kill to keep the human race asleep. But here's one last extraordinary lesson from this sacred text from 1939. It's the man pretending to be the wizard who breaks the cycle. He confesses, and he listens, and he gives. So what would it mean for us to do that in our lives? What would we give up by dropping the facade of power over others? What would our children learn from that? As you can see, I think a lot about this man taking this chance. As a reward for telling this truth, he gets to stop hiding behind a curtain, afraid of being exposed. He earns his freedom too. We need a lot more stories about this, about people who think they're heroes but learn that they are not. We need the mainstream narrative of our culture to grapple with people who are deeply invested in their own destiny, but who have to cope with the damage that they've actually done along the way. Not to turn around and become a savior, but to yield their spot in the center of the story and become part of the ensemble. If you're a part of a privileged group, summon the courage to channel this humility, this reconciliation. Let's find stories that teach us how to be heroic in this way. And then all of us, let's summon the courage to confront the other wizards with the integrity and the passion of Dorothy and the Scarecrow and the Tin Man. And arm our children with that same determination. Thanks, everybody. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts that they'd like to share? Initial reactions, favorite movies to recommend? Yes, sir.
So when you mentioned the 3 Disney examples, I couldn't help notice that all the protagonists are female. I was wondering if you have any examples of that journey for a male character that you could think of. I couldn't think of it.
Okay, great. So Jim, the question that he's asked is, he noticed that the Disney, this threesome of Disneys, have female protagonists. And it's interesting, in several of them, and also in Rogue One, the female protagonist is paired with a male character who does go through a journey of kind of humility. Gets broken down a little bit. And you're not going to believe this, but the movie that I think came out this year that comes the closest to showing kind of male pride, making a transition, Lego Batman. So we can talk about that offline. Thanks, Jim. What else we got? All right. You can watch that on demand. Other thoughts? Any other recommendations? Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I just had a question. I was wondering what distinguishes something that's like a sacred text and what's just a movie you can learn from? What's the difference?
Great question. How do we know if a movie is a sacred text or just a movie that we could learn from, or even just a movie that we sit back and enjoy and turn our brain off, as they say? This is a great question, especially as a parent, because I've been showing my kids lots of movies that I grew up with and seeing them in this weird way. Last night was Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I'm like, I know too much. Yeah, I mean, that's the beautiful thing. I guess we each can decide. Maybe movies aren't sacred at all to you, right? They don't have to be. We get to find the sacred in whatever aligns, right? Musical theater, poetry. Shakespeare. Yes.
All those
And
female characters.
yes, some good female characters. There's also The Merchant of Venice. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, we have to be able to see them as created by human beings. That's the breakthrough. That's what makes it work. Is because they can be sacred and flawed. Claire, yeah.
I was just thinking about, you were talking about, the number of colors, like the main star of the movie, and in regards to the big controversy from companies with the whole Oscars So White hashtag, and regarding like how they had the nomination, there were no people who were nominated for any of the films, like 2 or 3 years ago, whatever it was. And I think of it as like, there's like institutionalized racism, and I think of Hollywood, when you talk about like big budget box office summer films or indie films, it's sort of this, it's another institution that looks at the colors like on the side, even though like half the consumers who support those movies.
Yes, to everything that you said, Claire. I think that's, I'll summarize, which is the Oscars keep on doing this thing where even though there are a lot of really important actors and characters of color, they just like accidentally don't nominate them for any awards or the directors. And it's important that this not be about tokenizing, like, oh, well, we need to have some characters of color for that audience, but actually to be about, we need the stories to represent the audience. And if the audience is 49%, then that's not a token. So So yeah, I know I'm ruining what you said, but that's definitely definitely true. Yeah, you bet.
I'm wondering too, I don't remember the statistic, but I know that Gina Davis also talks a lot about not having enough women directors, and that also has to do with power and what decisions get made, and I wonder if you have anything to say about that.
Absolutely. There's a TED Talk I'll recommend by Naomi McDougall-Jones. She's a filmmaker who really breaks down where this pipeline is ending. We're graduating more women from film schools than men. And as many women are making a first film as men. And those are being accepted at festivals at the same rate as men. But then no one is giving them a feature commercial production. And they're giving men coming out of festivals like zillions, like all these Star Wars directors, and congratulations. But it was 17 years since the Wonder Woman director Patty Jenkins made her last film, which was nominated for Oscars. So yes, there's some the data shows a lot of bias there. Yes.
If the movies have glorified white violence and white military violence in terms of the cavalry, World War II, all kind of glorification of American violence, military violence. People who need violence need victims. They need someone to exact the violence on. So why, given current, predicament we're in with Kim Jong-un from Korea, he's just like us. He's just like us. He wants to solve his problem with military violence. So what is the big, where's the myth? There's no myth here. That's the actuality.
Well, I think there's a difference between artwork that examines history to understand it and shows how things are, and a myth that is a fantasy that is meant to teach us how to be. That's a hard distinction to make, and it's often blurry. But say a war film might be both a pro and an anti-war film, depending on how you look at it. It's trying to depict various emotions that truly happen, or various themes that truly happen. Star Wars isn't a war film. It's a cartoon. And it turns the bad guys into anonymous people, and it's teaching us some things that are sort of on the mythic plane. It's not helping us to examine the world socio-politically. And we understand that as adults, but we go into history class, if we've been raised on cartoon films, we sort of go in with maybe an oversimplified mindset. Yes, right now.
So one concept that I really struggle with is the idea that the man behind the curtain is also the one who has the power to change a cycle, because it seems like to me he already has a lot of power, and it's kind of unfortunate that he's the one who's going to have to break the cycle where there are lots of other people who are in pain and aren't able to do that. And is that just an unfortunate reality, or is there a more nuanced perspective?
That is exactly right. It's really important that the message not be, congratulations, white man behind the curtain, you get more power because we now control whether we heal. The thing that the wizard does is leave. He gets on a balloon and goes away, right? He doesn't get to say, okay, well, I'll be in charge, but I'll be nicer. And that's very important. It's a big sacrifice. It's a yielding of power. Yeah, in fact.
I have a question about if you know of any movies where there's that highlights or portrays more relationships between American and minority groups, and not so much between the dominant group and the minority group. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would love suggestions. I think about, it's not really between minority, but one of the movies that comes to mind is Lilo and Stitch. It's not really between minority groups, because it's between a Hawaiian family and aliens. But it's not a struggle between a dominant group and a marginalized group, and so that's really important too. That the story cannot always be kind of this hierarchy story. Yeah.
You didn't really talk about this, but I used to look at billboards and movies, and I'd be like, oh, there's people. I had a blind spot, sort of. And then one day I was like, oh, there's young people. You didn't really talk about age,
right.
So I was wondering, we've talked about with Greg, the cult of youth in America. whether you've seen any progress in that regard in any films.
Yeah, I mean that is great, and Gina Davis and the team are on the case. Though it's depressing because they also measure the age or the estimated age of all the characters in the movies, and men get old, or at least they get to be in their 50s and 60s. It's amazing to look at these numbers. You can be George Clooney until you're 75, Sean Connery. You know, like women disappear at 40 from the movies, and that's not only making the world seem like a bunch of young people, but it's also imbalanced. It also affects women and men, male and female characters in this amazingly different way. So thanks for bringing that up. Yes.
I have a question. So could you talk a little bit more about like whitewashing in the way that people tend to cast white actors in characters of color? I was thinking specifically with a couple of superhero movies that I thought recently where Benedict Cumberbatch and Scarlett Johansson have both been cast in roles that were as characters that were explicitly Asian in their origin. Like, can you talk more about that?
Yeah, it seems like it's a similar impulse and phenomenon as the white surrogate, that they have, there's a fixed idea in Los Angeles in the movie making world that the white audience is just incredibly important and more important than anybody else, and that the white audience is racist. Maybe it's true, but then we never know because they keep on swapping people out and not letting us see that amazing, what's the something in the whatever? Ghost in the Shell. Castle in the Sky. No, Ghost in the Shell, right? We didn't get to see that with some spectacular Hong Kong actress, right? Or, we had Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, took over the world in 1999. Why didn't we keep going with that? So yeah, it's that like fear of doing what would probably work.
Could you one more?
One more, and I'll take you in front of Grace.
So you talked at the beginning about like being able to like release yourself from certain stories and be able to look at them critically. So what do you think is the best way to do that? Like to let go of your sort of clinging to the perfectionism?
That's a wonderful question. I think that the discussion groups tomorrow should talk about that. Like, what are techniques to get better at the skill of critical distance? I mean, it's such a valuable thing. I've been trying to sort of make it a habit in my house, just whenever we read, even if it's a book we love or a movie we love, to just make it a habit of debriefing it and trying not to sound too academic about it. But hey, did you know how many girls were in that book? Or hey, did we ever hear from the Native American side in Little House on the Prairie? Like what are the questions that we can just sort of open up so that becomes normal. It doesn't mean that we're burning the books necessarily, unless you kind of as a family decide, yeah, we're going to put that book down. But yeah, it's a habit that takes a lot of practice. Maybe doing it with friends or family to just like push each other to break it down. Who do I give it back to? Angela, that's great. Well, enjoy the next song. I think you will know it. Thank you so much for your attention.